Hello and a very warm welcome to our February Pacecast. Thanks for joining us. Today's guest is a big personality around Hull and the East Riding. Not only does he head up a very successful family business, but he's also an active advocate for improving our prospects in this region. He's also been recognised royally, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about his CBE later. I'm delighted to say that my guest today is Tim Rix, who's the Chairman and Chief Executive of Rix, formerly known as J.R. Rix & Sons. Hello, Tim.
Hi, Anita. Well, that was a very nice introduction for me. I don't know how I'm going to live up to that.
I'm sure you will. So, those of you who listen to our podcast regularly know that it's standard practice for our guests to bring in a special object. Now, this object is something that's meaningful to them and has been pivotal in their life. So, I'm looking forward. I don't know what it is. So, I'm looking forward to seeing what Tim has brought in and listening to why it's so special. So, over to you, Tim.
Well, I've given this a lot of thought because I really could have brought all sorts of things in to talk about. But recently we moved offices and I was clearing my father's office out and I found a volume report for March 1987 for all the vehicles that were delivering fuel. And that was at the very start of my career 37 years ago when I came into the family business. And in those days, we used to do a day's work, whatever we were doing in the office. And then to finish off the day, we'd probably go and drive a lorry into the night to make sure that we got all our deliveries out when we're trying to grow our petroleum business. And so on this particular day, I was driving one of the vehicles, leaving the depot at 7 o'clock and doing a delivery to Wetherby, to a filling station. And it just really reminded me of how we've built the Rix business and, you know, what we expect of people. You know, we don't just expect them to, or we don't ask people to just do the jobs. We ask people to give that little bit extra. So a lot of the directors and managers and family members all have something else that they can do to help the business. And in many cases, that's have a heavy goods vehicle license so that they can actually help the business when we get very, very busy. And that's proved to be very helpful. And it's not just me that's done that, but it's my two children, my two boys that are now in the business. They both have their HGV licenses and they can go out and deliver fuel when we're very busy. And it's something that, you know, I think is really special to our business where we can go above and beyond and actually do something very different from other businesses.
And am I right in thinking you've actually done on an occasion helped customers out by actually going and delivering fuel in remote places in bad weather?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, you know, I've done it, the kids have done it. I've had all sorts of experiences of, you know, having to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning because the customers rung me and they need some fuel, and I've actually gone myself and collected the lorry from the depot and gone and delivered it. You know, there are all sorts of tales that I can tell. I was once delivering in Holderness one evening, and it was really quite late, and I was lost as usual because every time I drove the lorries, it was dark. And I knocked on a door, and there were all these screeching women in this house. And it was an Ann Summers party, and they thought that I was the stripper. And I was a bit alarmed by this because I was only a young lad at the time dressed in my Rix boiler suit, just trying to deliver oil.
Oh, funny. Right. Well, thank you for sharing that story with us. Let's go right back to the beginning then. So, as we all know, you head up the very successful Rix Group. Am I right in thinking you're the fifth generation to head up the business?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm the fifth generation of the family business.
So great-great-great-grandfather.
Yeah.
Yes, set it up. So tell us the story of Rix, how it started and how those early days of your involvement.
So we've got to go all the way back to the 1870s for when Rix started. And my great-great-grandfather, Robert Rix, was a sea captain. And he had actually, before he was a sea captain on the steamers, he'd gone away to sea before the mast on sailing ships. So he'd been all around the east coast of the UK because that's pretty much where he plied his trade. And in fact, I've got an order for a brand new ship built in 1887 for £93.
£93.
So the price of ships has moved on a little bit since then. And also, I've got an invoice from Andrew Jackson's, who we still use as our solicitors today for maritime things, for £12, 12 shillings and sixpence when he was operating outside his insured limits. Now, it might surprise you to know that he was actually only in Perth in Scotland, not Perth in Australia. So he can't have been insured to go particularly far in this particular ship. But it was left to my great-great-grandmother to sort out the issues because the people who held the mortgage on the ship were trying to reclaim it because they were claiming that he wasn't insured. Obviously, they didn't reclaim the ship, but I just think it's interesting that there he was at sea while great-great-grandmother was left sorting things out and using solicitors that we use today. And probably £12 shillings and sixpence, they were probably being overcharged like we are nowadays by the solicitors. But anyway.
Let's not get into that one. So that's the early days of the business. So let's talk about how it's evolved.
So the business has evolved really predominantly as a shipping business into the 1920s. With coastal steamers up and down the east coast of the UK, predominantly carrying coal. And then that moved on in the 30s and 40s with petroleum distribution. And after the war, when the pool was disbanded, in the war everything was pooled together, but after the war, in 1947, the Rix family had a bit of an argument because we originally were Robert Rix and now we're J.R. Rix and Sons. A lot of people the older people will remember that Rix had some actors in the family, Brian Rix and Sheila Mercier. Brian Rix with his farces at Whitehall, and Sheila Mercier, who was Annie Sugden in Emmerdale Farm, and they were part of Robert Rix. And they
did not know that.
And my grandfather decided that he was doing all the work, and a lot of people were doing a lot of acting, and it was quite difficult. And so he handed his notice in, and great-grandfather at the time obviously didn't want to lose grandfather from the family business. And he said, look, if we go on our own and we take the one ship, which was the Magrix in 1947, will you stay? Will you rescind your notice and stay with me? And so grandfather decided that he would do that. And so everything that we have today really comes from that one ship in 1947. Now, at the same time, the other side of the family decided that they didn't want to continue with the oil business, which was in those days based down on Watson Street. And so we took that over as well. So we ended up with a shipping business and a very small oil business. And in those days, there was no refinery on the Humber. So we used to charter ships from a company called Rowbothams, and bring the fuel all the way from the Thames up the Old Harbour and up the River Hull. And you can't imagine that any ship was small enough to actually get up the Old Harbour to Anne Watson Street, which is where B&Q now is on Stone Ferry. But they did. And in those days, they carried about 350 tonnes. Well, over the more recent past, we bring product into our depots now up the River Hull, and our barges, which now collect it from the refineries on the Humber that have subsequently been built, carry about 500 tonnes. So, things move on. It's quite surprising. So
that was your grandfather?
Yeah.
Then clearly father took over.
Yeah, well, my grandfather sadly had a heart condition and wasn't very well. And so my father had to leave school at 16 to come into the business. And, in those days, the business was nothing like the size it is today. But the shipping side had become quite busy, and grandfather had ordered quite a number of new ships to be built on the continent. And now he'd ordered these ships, and there wasn't really any work for them. And then he fell ill. So father, who was only 16 at the time, left school and found himself in the office almost on his first day, having to go around and see the bank managers to try and get these 4 ships financed that grandfather had built.
Which 16?
Well, he was a bit older than that then, but it wasn't much older. It was, he was certainly 19 or 20, which he did. And he ran these ships. And not only did he run those particular ships, but he took a number of German ships on time charter as well. And he ran them. And I can remember when I was younger, we lived in Headon in those days. My mum was a hairdresser in Headon, in the marketplace. She had her own hairdressing shop. And wherever we went, father was always on the telephone. We couldn't go anywhere where there wasn't a telephone. And wherever we were, restaurant, out, wherever, dad was on that telephone doing link calls to the ships, giving them instructions as to where to go and what to do. And that's the one thing I can remember about my childhood is if you ever picked the phone up, all you could hear is night radio. Will you accept a link call from the Bob Rix? And you could. And as a little lad, I used to be frightened to death of the telephone because you could never understand anything that anybody was saying.
So this was obviously this was your dad, and Was it always expected in the family that the son would take over the reins?
Look, I think the business as I can only speak for myself.
Yes.
I can't speak for the. I think Dad, as a necessity, had to come into the business. I was always really interested, because how can you not be interested in ships and trucks and all those sort of things? It's a bit like a toy box. So you have an interest in it, and from a very early age, Dad used to take me around to the dry docks and used to see the ships being repaired. It was in those days, drink was a big problem on the ships. Our ships used to spend more time on the rocks because they'd turned the wrong way than they did actually managing to get to most of the ports. That's what I remember. So they were always in dry dock. They were always having the bottoms taken out of them and renewed. And I can see my dad now, because he always had a penknife. He would go everywhere with this penknife, sticking his penknife into steelwork to see whether it was good or not, or whether it was, whether it needed replacing. And I can remember on one occasion, because in the 60s and certainly the 70s, there were a lot of restrictive practices in the shipyards. And if anybody was seen to do anything other than the jobs that the men were given to do, everybody went on strike. And I was on one of our ships once in a dry dock, and Dad got his penknife out, and everybody went on strike. And I think it's because he was doing something that he shouldn't have been, that they should have been doing, and it was only a small thing. But I think the my children certainly have never experienced that, and I would never want them to, because I think those restrictive practices were something that killed off the industries that we've got, that we haven't got in Britain today. And I'm not blaming the workers. I think it was a mixture of very bad management not moving forward, and workers being very difficult. I think in business today, it's about everybody trying to work together. Mm.
So when you were growing up then, were you growing up knowing that you were going to go into the family business, or did you have a choice to
Well, I think I would always had a choice, but I always wanted to go into the family business. I found it fascinating whenever I had the opportunity. I would be in the office when I had the opportunity. I would... my grandfather on my mother's side he was a general manager at BP Saltend, but when he had his holidays, he would actually go on our ships for a holiday. I can't really understand why I did that, but anyway, he did. And because Dad, in his wisdom, had decided to cut costs on the ships, he always took the cooks off them. And Dad's idea was that you took the cooks off the ship, and somebody else could cook, and you paid everybody a bit more, but you saved money because you weren't paying a cook. So when Grandpa went on the ship, he used to do all the cooking. So wherever he went on the ship's masters were quite happy because they had Grandfather there doing the cooking. He enjoyed doing it.
So you went to school where?
I went to school, first of all, in Hornsey at a school called Darnley's, where I was taught maths by an old First World War fighter pilot called Mr. Darnley, who I can remember in his beekeeping kit and teaching me pounds, shillings and pence, which, of course, is absolutely bloody useless nowadays.
Well, a lot of education when you learn.
And in base 12. And then I moved on from there to, I was sent away to school to Marton Hall, which was a school in Bridlington, where I suppose I was locked away with 65 other young kids. A boarding school, where it was sort of survival of the fittest. And then I left there and I went to Sedbergh School, which is probably best known for people like Will Carling and rugby over on the West Coast. Now, the one thing I remember about my school days is I was always freezing cold, soaking wet, and starving hungry.
But rugby, you like rugby though? Did you play rugby?
I love rugby. I've always played rugby. When I came back from being away at school, one of the ways to start to get to know a lot of people locally was to play local rugby. So I played at Hull and East Riding, and then I played at Hornsey. Rugby's a great game to get to know lots of people.
Yeah. So after school, you went straight into the business? No,
I went. I was the first person in the Rix family to go off to university. Well, I say university. It is a university now. It was a polytechnic. I struggled a bit with my A levels to get the right grades because we were too busy running up and down hills and playing rugby at school to think about anything like doing any studies. And so I remember I'd been on an expedition across the Sahara Desert after we'd finished school, and I was waiting for my results. And Dad was determined that I should be an engineer, and to be an engineer, you'd had to do maths and physics at A level, and I wasn't particularly good at maths and physics. And I remember I did maths and physics and geography, and I loved geography. I think what I would say, and what I've always thought, is that you should let your kids do what they want to do rather than be told what to do. And that's what I've tried to do with my children. But look, I always wanted to please the old man, so I was going to be an engineer. I don't think Dad had any idea what an engineer was. I think Dad thought an engineer was somebody who would go on board a ship and sort of sort the engines out, whereas actually an engineer is somebody quite different from that. It's, whether you're a production engineer or a mechanical engineer. But anyway, I did my degree in engineering at Sheffield Polytechnic, ultimately having failed my A-levels, and then I went to a crammer in Oxford where there was one-to-one tuition. I remember my results coming through, and I rang up when I got back from the desert, and Dad said, "Oh, you've failed your exams. Your results are B-O-O-B, boob." So I thought, well, that probably sums it up. And anyway, so I said, "But I've enrolled you in this place. It's costing me a fortune, called Edward Green's Tutorial Establishment." And he said, they put you in for loads of exams, and eventually they'll ask you the right questions that you'll be able to answer. And so I used to run from one exam room to another with the different A-level boards. And I think I've got now 3 A-levels in physics and 3 in maths. And I used to call in at the pub on the way past to these different exams. And of course, everybody else there wanted to be doctors or whatever. And they needed, all A's and B's. And all I needed, I think, for Sheffield Polytechnic, which is now a university, Sheffield Hallam, I needed 2 E's. I suppose with grade inflation, 2 E's, I always kid myself now, he's like a B at today's level. So.
It's obviously important to your dad. He was clearly adamant you were going to get those qualifications. Yeah,
that was fine with Dad, but Dad would be ringing up when I was supposed to be doing my work and saying, "You need to come back. We're busy to drive a lorry." And I used to say, "Dad, well, I am trying to pass this degree, Dad, and I can't be coming back and driving the lorries all the time."
Yeah.
But it all worked out all right in the end. And I think people get very hung up about grades and about inflation, and what you really need is a well-rounded person. That, I'm not saying I am a well-rounded person, but you need, when you're looking for people, it's well-rounded people, that have done the best they can and tried.
Try hard and apply themselves.
And I think we've got loads of really good examples of that in Rix at the moment, where we have a lot of kids that have struggled with their education, but actually are in management positions now and are really driven to perform.
Yeah. So what was your first role in the business then after you got your degree?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it wasn't my first job. My first job was actually, I was going to work for De Mulders that used to do all the rendering and making of dog food. And it was a bit like walking into hell, because you walked into this building that had a pit with all dead animals, all mixed up with a digger. And it was, I've never seen anything like it before in my life.
What was this, sorry?
It was. They make dog food from the leftovers of all the carcasses and animals and stuff. So I'd never eat dog food.
No.
Yeah. And it was like walking into hell. But I wanted to work somewhere else, so I had a year to go and work somewhere else. And I accepted this job with Tony.
Sorry to interrupt. Was this because your dad felt you had to go and work somewhere else?
No, because to be fair, I was on a sandwich course, so I needed a year to go and work somewhere.
Okay, got you.
And then what happened was there was in the college, and this is amazing, in the Polytechnic, the people that were looking for placements for people put a placement on the board that nobody else was interested in. And it was to come to Hull, believe it or not, and work for Globe Engineering, which was part of the J. Marr Group, to work in ship repair, which was absolutely my most ideal job that I could ever imagine. And so I accepted this job, and I came and I worked on the fish dock. And in those days, what was happening was all the deep sea trawlers, like the Pict, that was the sister ship to the Gaul, that was obviously sadly lost, were being converted either into standby vessels to stooge around the rigs, or that in Marr's case, they were converting their ships into seismic survey ships. Really, really interesting time. All these ships were going off and surveying the eastern seaboard of America, and I think there were 2 or 3 different companies, and I was the only person that worked at Globe that was allowed to go on all these different ships, because I was sort of looking after them, maintaining all the invoicing and making sure that, I mean, I loved the job because obviously it was absolutely, I mean, I could do it with my eyes closed. Yeah. I found it really frustrating because there were restrictive practices. And I could see that it was the old fish dock mentality of, when a trawler came in, at all costs you had to get it finished and back out to sea again. which was important in those days. But when you were doing a job that was priced, it was more critical to make sure that you were more efficient. And the fish dock struggled with that concept. And I think I'd only been there 2 days. And the foreman boilermaker, I can remember him like it was yesterday, called Wilf Wood, had me up against Screaming Reamer, his assistant, had me up against the wall with Wilf Wood screaming in my ear, "Do you know, lad, who's in charge here, and it's not you?" In a very threatening way, and that sort of put me in my position, but it sort of made me more determined than ever that, things needed to change. But I loved that job. I lived there. I nearly lived in the office. I remember they paid me £40 a week. I would have done it for nothing. And I used to ride my bike up and down the dock to the different ships so I could get on them and deal with everything. And the other really interesting job we had, we were looking after a ship that they'd sold to the Ministry of Defence, which was a ship called the Colonel Templar that was effectively a spy ship that used to work out of Faz Lane. And there were restricted areas on that ship. And that was a really interesting job looking after that.
You're clearly passionate about the shipping side, but Rix of today is a group of 22 businesses?
Yeah. Well, it's a lot. I mean, I can't even tell you how many.
I'm interested in how it's evolved over the years, because it's got its heritage in history, in shipping, and then obviously the fuel side, the oil. But there's a lot more to Rix than that. So when you took over, was that your influence, that all that diversification? Or?
I think that it's a mixture of circumstances and situations, and all the Rix businesses, whether the shipping, whether the fuel, or whatever they are, they've all evolved, they've all changed. And we've actively managed that. I think that, I was really passionate and interested in the shipping side because it was our history, and my grandfather and my great-grandfather had all been involved in it. But I think probably when I took over 20 years ago, I've worked very closely with my managing director, who's Rory Clark, because when you first go into it, you sort of asked me earlier on, what's it like, do you go into a family business? When you go into a family business, people treat you with an awful lot of suspicion wherever you've arrived from. And they think that whatever you're doing, you're after their job or discovering what they're not doing right. So somehow you've got to integrate, or this is what I believe anyway, this is what I've told the kids, you've got to try and integrate yourself into that business and be part of it and ask people the question, why are you doing it this way? Why have you always done it this way? And if they say, well, we've always done it this way, you say, but haven't you thought about why we should be maybe doing it a bit differently? And I think that my father was very keen for me to be absolutely involved in all parts of the business. So I spent a lot of time in each individual part of the business. So I would spend a lot of time with the ship's fitters going around, working on the ships, making sure they kept going. So you learnt your welding, your fitting. It's the first time I've ever fallen asleep on my feet, because we used to go from one job to another to keep these ruddy things moving. And I've never been so tired ever in my life. And it was disaster after disaster, but that was in the old days. Then you became a boiler engineer. Then you were a tanker driver while you were doing all this.
But working on the coalface like this is how you're earning your stripes, isn't it?
I think what I learned from that is, and there is a day when you've got to learn to stop working at the coalface and actually start working in the office. But what you learn is all the problems that all these people face. So when you are actually trying to get them to do these jobs, you have made the mistakes yourself. And believe you me, I've made plenty of mistakes. Yeah. Which we won't go into now. But while I've been driving these wagons or repairing people's boilers or repairing the ships, and I think you have a really much better understanding of the jobs that those people do and the problems that they face. And I've been very keen for my kids, my two lads, Robbie and Harry, who've come into the business now, to be aware of all that as well. And
are they doing the same as you then? Are they on the coalface? They're rolling up their sleeves?
Well, I think the answer to that is yes, because they've obviously both driven the lorries. I think it's probably more difficult to be. The business is way bigger now than it was then, and so you can't sort of be on the coalface of all the things. It's sort of almost impossible. But as an example, Robbie works as a CAD technician. I mean, Robbie went to Heimers when he was coming out of Heimers. COVID was there. There didn't seem much point in sending him to university. All his friends were potentially going to university to be locked in. So he was always very interested in that practical aspect. So he went and learned all the CAD techniques. So he can now draw up any, as well as driving a lorry, he can draw any of the static caravans that we've got now in our manufacturing facility. And he's quite capable of doing that now. And I think that's a good skill for him to have. He's a valued member of that team. Now, there will be a point at which he has to stop drawing caravans and start to learn other things. Harry, on the other hand, Harry went to university, Newcastle University. He went and worked at Accenture in management consultancy. And what I can tell you is that Accenture as a management consultancy firm works very differently from how a family business like Rix works.
I can imagine, yeah.
And so it's been quite interesting. I mean, look, my view on these things is there are good things to take out of every experience and everything. So there are good things that we do. There are things that Accenture do that we can learn from. Yeah. So that's been an interesting integration of Harry, who now looks after all our digital and IT. And to be honest, that is one of the things which is going to be so important going forward, dealing with things like that. So I'm very pleased that we actually have a member of the family who can do that.
Is there? I don't want to get into it too much personal stuff. But is there any rivalry between the two boys? Because at some point, one of them's going to be sitting in your chair.
Well, I think what will happen is the two very different boys. You know, one's much more practical than the other. They have skills that complement each other, and I think actually, I mean, look, we all go to work in Rix. I never see them. We're all in different directions all the time. I just don't bump into them. I think people think that I sit in an office with the two kids, and I just don't. I don't see them at all at work. Because they're busy doing what their things are. And I think actually the good thing is that I've sort of been on my own as a member of the family since I lost my father 7 years ago. But they'll work together, and I think that it's.
Do they get on?
Oh yeah, they get on. Yeah, absolutely, 100% get on. Yeah,
that's good.
And I think that's a good thing. I think that'll be a good thing for the business. Look, the boys in terms of capability are probably way more capable than I ever was. And so I think that that's a great opportunity for them to take the business forward to the next step. I mean, we're sort of at the stage now where, I've worked with Rory for 15 years. I have the crazy ideas of what we're going to go and do. And Rory's the kind of person that makes sure that when we do it, all the legislation's in place and we're not doing anything too crazy. But I try and run Rix, or I've tried to run Rix since I've been doing it for the last 20 years. In an entrepreneurial way. So if there's an opportunity related to whatever we're doing, let's take it, let's have a go at it. And, if you do that, the one thing that I have learned is that if you're going to do something, you've got to put somebody who knows what they're doing in charge of it.
So that diversification's worked well for Rix, though, hasn't it? Because if you just focused in one particular business area, then when there's challenges in that market, it obviously makes it more difficult for the company. But the fact you've got all these different businesses across different sectors, if you like, it strengthens your position when things are particularly. If you talk about the caravan industry, for example, that's challenging at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the caravan industry is very challenging. I don't think there's anything that we've ever done that hasn't been challenging, and it's usually pretty challenging as soon as we go into it. So I'm always ready for a storm as soon as we start doing something, because it's never straightforward. And you learn a lot of lessons. And if you learn the lessons the hard way, you tend to understand how you need to deal with those things. But yeah, I mean, the caravan industry came about really completely and totally by accident. When the caravan industry in 2008 was absolutely in free fall, and when it was last having a really bad time, Cosalt, that were tenants of mine and had a site next to some of our land on Stone Ferry, basically wrapped up, stopped operating, and I was able to buy their factory, and I bought it really as a property deal to build a supermarket on.
Oh, right.
And we were going to build a 120,000 square foot Sainsbury's on Stone Ferry, and Sainsbury's were really, really keen on doing this massive thing, and we've got a lot of land, especially when you added the Cosalt caravan factory to it. And then anyway, because of a number of things, the change in what was going on with the supermarket decided that they didn't want to proceed. And so here I was with this sort of factory, which I'd bought with absolutely everything in it. There were caravans still on the line. There was all the kit to do everything. There was just everything in there. And I think the interesting thing about that was that I knew the guy that had run it, a guy called Peter Nevitt. And I rang him up and I said, Peter, do you want a couple of challenges? So he said, oh, well, what are they? So I said, well, the first one is, do you want to run your own factory? So he said, oh, yeah, I'd be really interested to do that. He said, what's the second one? I said, you'd have to work for me. And he worked for a PLC, and then he was going to come and work for a private business. And there's a lot of difference between these two things. And without Peter, we could never have got.
He obviously said yes.
Yeah, he said yes. But what I knew about Peter was because he had tried to buy the business for I think 16 million quid. They wanted 30 million quid for it, and I'd bought absolutely everything for 1.2 million quid with a split on plant and equipment, land and buildings of 50-50. So it worked out pretty well for us that we'd picked this up. I knew Nevitt had a business plan, and we effectively just sort of pressed the button and started the production line going again because everything was there, and we had a queue of people wanting to work for us, and we could be way more flexible than everybody else. And that was really the beginning of caravans. You could say, well, you know, if you always think everything should be related to everything else, so you do what you understand and what you know about, there is a sort of tenuous link because at the time our ships were bringing a lot of timber in when we had dry cargo ships from the Baltic states. And we were always looking for cargoes to get them back into position. And we'd gone through larder cars, we'd gone through machinery. And then the next thing that they wanted was second-hand static caravans. So I had this crazy idea because we were filling the ships with every ship, 7 of them were going back full of static caravans. They looked like floating caravan parks. And I had this crazy notion that, and Rory would tell you it was a crazy notion, that actually what we could do is we could start building caravans and we could take the old ones in part exchange and we could use the same lorries that took the new ones to bring the old ones back. And we could create freight for ourselves on the ships, which seemed like a really good idea to me. And it was a bit like, you know, selling cars, which is what we do as well. It's never quite worked out quite like that, but that was the link that we had that I had in my head anyway. And, you know, one day I think it would work because we still have the business, Seaway Logistics, that exports second-hand caravans to the Baltic states and Poland, where they take them and they take these second-hand units and live in them.
So these businesses, it sounds from what you're saying that they've come about through opportunity. You've seen an opportunity and you've seized it. So am I right in thinking there hasn't really been a plan when you sat down and you took over the business? You didn't set out with this 5-10 year plan to build a group of businesses, selling cars, building holiday homes.
Anita, there's always a plan. It's just as soon as you've got it, it changes. And it could change this afternoon when I go back. I mean, you know, I think that, you know, that certainly when, you know, we've had for the last few years as a group, we've had a very good run of things, even through COVID. Touch wood. But I mean, it's getting very hard now. And we've always expected that to be the case. But, you know, in my world, when things get hard, opportunities arrive. And so there are, and I don't know what necessarily those opportunities are. I have in my mind what I think they might be. And so we can take what we've got, we can add to it, or we can change it. You know, I've been very keen to diversify what we do with building static caravans because, you know, it is a very cyclical market. And so a year ago, we started a conversions business because somebody arrived on our doorstep that was unhappy with where they worked, and we had a spare factory through our property portfolio. And you know, we'd started by doing a whole load of police cars for the Bermudan police force, believe it or not. So if you go to Bermuda, you'll see a Victory Conversion sticker on the side of a Bermudan police car. And we make secure minibuses for the government. And, you know, I love the migrants because we had an order for 140 secure minibuses to move migrants around, which we're in the middle of doing at the moment. So we've started that business sort of from scratch.
Are you quite agile then when these opportunities come along? Do you kind of
physically not particularly agile, I have to say, because I know you see me on my bike occasionally.
I do,
and have a good laugh about it. No, what a spectacle that is! Yes, with my Leica on, but yeah, no, I think that what's happened was when Rory and I started working together. If I go sort of right back to the very beginning, when I was talking about coming back into or arriving in the business, when you asked me that question, I arrived in the business. Eventually, as people retire, what happens is they put all the files on your desk, so you end up doing their job. That's ultimately what happens when you're in a family business. Certainly, what happened to me. You usually get all the jobs that nobody else wants to do to start with. And then as they retire, you get all the jobs. And then you get to choose the people that you want to work with going forwards. And you put your team together. And to start with, that's very difficult because wherever you go, people say it was never done like that, or so-and-so did it this way and you're doing it the wrong way. And it can be very frustrating. But I think, we work at the top of the Rix organisation pretty closely, the top management team. We all have offices next to each other. The doors are always open. We're always shouting through to each other. I think that, people working from the office, it's like the beating heart of the organisation. I think if you have people not working in the office, the business loses its soul. You lose a lot of what we've got that makes us agile to make things work.
I agree with that. Yeah.
And one day Rory said to me, Tim, we're banging our head on the brick wall with the ships. Really, what you shouldn't just carry on doing something because you've always done it. Maybe we need to look at some of these other things that we could be doing. And it's a bit like being a farmer. When you've been a ship owner all your life, it's a passionate thing that you just carry on doing. And I suppose it was a light went on in my head at that point, and it did make me think. Actually, do you know what? We need to think beyond what we've always been doing. So what we need to really do is have assets that we add value to. So, for instance, with the ships, we didn't just have them on the open market. We created a liner service running backwards and forwards to the Baltic states, and I spent a week, a month out finding cargoes for the ships because we put lots of small shippers together to fill the ship up, which meant that I was in Riga and Tallinn in the Baltic states after the Iron Curtain had fallen away, and I called it the Wild East because it was exhilarating, interesting, and there were lots of opportunities, and so. But that was just the ships. But then you look at where we've got to with that. We then had the tankers. The ships turned into tankers. The tankers are then floating filling stations that we have on the River Humber that deliver the vast majority of fuel on the River Humber, and the Humber is one of the busiest estuaries. And we stretch that out up and down the east coast of the UK. So you can make a telephone call to maritime bunkering, and we'll give you a price for anything from 10 tonnes to 2,000 tonnes delivered by our boats up and down the east coast of the UK, which makes us pretty unique in the fact that we can do that. So our ships are now being used as floating filling stations. And the dry cargo ships that we no longer have, because they'd come to the end of the life in 2008 and trade just absolutely fell through the floor. The ships went for scrap. We didn't renew them. Two things happened with that. One, we had a terminal with ABP, which we used to bring the timber in through, and that's where the Siemens terminal is now. And what we did with that was when the Caravan Industry collapsed, not only had I bought the co-salt business, but I also bought the Atlas storage land, which was 23 acres immediately opposite the dock, actually to build a caravan factory on, because we were building a supermarket where the caravan factory was. But it turned into a timber terminal because it was right off the dock. So we could actually be in charge of our own destiny and take the timber straight off the dock and put it straight on our own terminal. We moved out of where we were to make way for the Siemens operation. And now ultimately we lease that to one of our biggest customers, and he uses it as his timber terminal. And I think that's that will be very successful for him.
You said there's always a plan.
Yeah,
so I want to know what's the plan for Rix going forward? What when you visualise the future and Harry and Robbie taking over, what do you think the company's going to look like?
We're getting to the stage now where I've getting to the end of my career, I suppose, and I'm the dinosaur that lives in the museum. If you come see me in my office, it's all pictures on the wall of all the past, and it's the only part of our new office that is about the past. Everything else is modern.
It is like a museum.
It is like a museum, and I am the dinosaur that lives in it. And, I realise that, I'm coming to the end of my time. And, interestingly, Rory has gone part-time now and become a non-exec. Although I noticed this week he's been in 5 days because he's been very busy. But and the kids are now starting to get to a position where they're starting to take over. And James Doyle has come in, who's moved on from the shipping side to run the caravan side and the manufacturing side, and now he's going to take over is managing director of Rix. So we're at a changing of the guard, really. And I've been very keen to sort of leave things for the kids so that it's a successful business. And actually, there's sort of 5 main divisions of that business, which is energy, shipping, manufacturing, property, and van and car sales, with a sort of a fintech business tacked on the end, which is accountable, which Harry's been involved in. And I think that the boys can shouldn't call them kids, should I? The boys can take it in whatever way they want to. It's completely flexible.
Can they though? How much influence are you?
I think that I have to. The new office is a really good example where I was we used to be on Spivey Street, and I was absolutely adamant that we weren't going to move offices and we didn't need better offices. But then somebody pointed out that we were sort of trying to make a backstreet office better and better and needed more space. And Harry said Harry wanted to build these, different sorts of areas that people could be in to make it nicer for them. And it just sort of occurred to me that we weren't going to sort of achieve that. And I knew that 2 Humber Keys had been for sale, and so I rang up one of the property guys that I know, and he said, "Oh yeah, we can buy that. We'll sort it out. We can get it for a good price." And I'd been really against it. But actually, we bought the building, it came with a load of tenants, we filled it. So for the first time in its history, that building, which was built 10 years ago, is now full and thriving. And that was wrong. I was wrong. We should have moved. It was the right thing to do because, people work in a nice environment now down on the marina.
Yeah.
It's a nice office. It's modern. There are other people there. There's interactions. So I was wrong, and the younger generation were right.
I'm conscious of the time, but I do want to talk about this. So you were wrong.
I'm often wrong, Anita.
And so I want to talk about that. Any regrets? Anything looking back now with the benefit of hindsight you would have done differently?
Yeah, I can tell you there is actually, and it's to do with building ships, because we have built ships as well.
Funny about ships.
I know, but it's a regret because I decided that a lot of the ships that we run now we built for ourselves. And I suppose what I was trying to do was preserve the jobs of the people that work for us in our little shipyard at Paul. But actually what I discovered was, too late almost, with the last ship we built, that you can build ships for about 2/3 the price in Vietnam or Turkey or wherever else. And my biggest mistake, I think, was to build the last boat we built there at the yard. It was too big to build there. And it cost way more than it should have done. And actually, when we were £1 million into it, I should have just stopped. I think the Scottish government's learning this at the moment, actually. I could have maybe saved them a lot of money. But the standing instructions now are, if I ever suggest we're going to build ships again, I've got to be taken outside the office and shot, because we definitely should not be doing it, because we cannot compete. Sadly, we cannot compete, even without restrictive practices, with yards in the Far East.
So there's no more shipbuilding?
No more shipbuilding for Rix.
All right, he said it.
Not in my lifetime.
We've heard it.
I can tell you now. Yeah.
Thinking back to that young Tim playing rugby, running up the slopes, not doing his studies, what advice would you give to him now, looking back?
That's an interesting question. I've not ever really thought about that. Well, I'm certainly not as slim as I used to be, and I certainly couldn't run up and down the slopes now. And probably the best advice I could give to myself is not to become a Labrador when I left school, because when you'd been starved until you were 19 years old, when you're freed, you can always you make up for it, don't you? And I think I've been doing that ever since. So probably a healthier lifestyle might be the way I would go.
Well, one of the questions I was going to ask is what would you change about yourself? So I'm guessing maybe that.
Well, I think nowadays you've got to be try and be as healthy as you can. I think as you get older, you realise that you're not going to last forever. And I know everybody laughs and they see me on my bike and they laugh, but I quite enjoy going on my bike at lunchtime because I do about 12 miles and it gets me out in the fresh air and if you're going to do any public speak or anything, you practice while you're on your bike. I mean, people think you're a lunatic when you go past them, but and it also gives you time to think and you clear your head and it gets you away from whatever's been getting on your nerves that particular day.
And you feel better for it. You go back feeling re-energized. Yeah. So what's next for Tim then? You keep talking about, changing the guard and all that. You're still very much involved in the business. You're still working there every day.
Well, I've been trying to take Fridays off, but that doesn't seem to have worked.
Well, it's Friday today.
Yes. Well, and I've got to be back in the office later on. But I am determined that I am going to step back, and the next generation are going to
Are you putting a timescale
take over. Well, it sort of happens. It evolves. I mean, I think of my father with me. Dad would, there wasn't a day when I came in and he didn't, and I suddenly took over. It just sort of happened where he was there less and less. And then when he did come in, I'd get a bollocking, once a day, once a week, once a month. It became less, and then it was once every 6 months. And now I'm doing the same to the kids. So life moves on, doesn't it?
Do you think you can let go? Can you visualise a day when you can let go?
I think when you've been,
interfere.
For 40 years, I've been involved in the Rix business, how it's evolved. It's way bigger, way more successful than it was. It's way more diversified. There are lots of opportunities for us. It's exciting to go to work. It's interesting to go to work. If it wasn't, I wouldn't be doing it. I also feel responsible for a lot of the people that work for us. It's been it's been a very difficult time for the people that we've had to make redundant, but it's been a difficult time for me because I absolutely, when I take somebody on, I take them on because I want them to be there for the duration. And we have generations of people that work for our organisation. And when you get to a situation where we are at the moment with the Caravan Industry, which is an absolute free fall and is a very difficult place to be at the moment. And you've had to make very good people and people that are your friends, have become your friends, that redundant. It makes it very, very difficult.
It's very personal, isn't
but
it?
It is very personal. And if you run a family business, it's probably more personal because you walk down the lines, you speak to everybody. Anybody can approach me, anybody can come and see me, and people do. Not very often, but, people have a grievance. I mean, I like them to have gone through the process of seeing everybody else first before they come and see me. Otherwise, there'd be no point in having anybody else. But yeah, people can, and I think that's important. That I'm open and available, and that's exactly what I say to the two boys. That's exactly what, and I believe that they will be. But yeah, I mean, it'll be a gradual process.
It doesn't sound like you're ready yet, if you don't mind me saying so.
Does it not sound like that?
No.
Well,
you're still too excited about it.
I feel as excited now as I was, probably more excited now than I was, when I started out all those years ago, because it's been moulded into a business that I think's really, really interesting.
I mean, you've grown it into a massive business relative to where it started. Yeah. So, what would you do if you were going to work every day?
What would I do?
Ride a bike.
Well, I don't think I'd be very good at riding. I can't go much longer than an hour, Anita, so I don't think I'd be riding my bike.
So these are long days to fill, you see.
I'll have to get an electric bike.
Which defeats the purpose.
No, I have plenty of things that I can do at home. There's always painting and decorating and job. I've got a list of jobs when I go home from
So before we close then, proudest achievement?
I think...
Just one thing.
Proudest achievement... I think actually I'll put it down to getting my CBE, because I think you get a bit of recognition for being involved for the last 10 years in trying to change what happens in the city. And
what was the CBE for specifically?
For the economy and regeneration of the Humber region. and if I think anyway, and obviously I'm a passionate believer in we need to be ambitious in what we do. If I was running the city and trying to run it like Rix, I would be looking at a project like the Lagoon project, which I promote and came up with because, we need to stop the city from flooding. We need to make sure we've got more land for all the opportunities that are out there with the renewables in the North Sea. We need to make it more of a destination and place make the city. And I think that all that, and we need to make sure that the road that goes east-west through the city works. And today's a good example because it's taken me an hour to get from the marina to here today because of an accident. And, I think that there's great opportunities for this area. I absolutely live and breathe Hull. I promote it wherever I go. People laugh at me a lot for it, but I genuinely believe that it's a great city. There's great people that live here, but we need some ambition. And, that is the single most important thing that we need to do here.
Yeah, well, thank you for all your ambition and for doing everything you can to improve this area for all of us. And we want to get to a place, a point in time where we can talk about Hull and people aren't laughing at us.
Yeah, and do you know what? I think we got, with city culture, I think, we got there. I wasn't sure when I was chairman of the city leadership board about city of culture, but actually I came to believe in it and I came to see the city start to believe in itself. And so what I was trying to do was look at what we were going to do after city of culture. How could we move that on? How could we take advantage of that? And I had, when I came up with the Lagoon idea with a number of other people, we had to raise money privately, and we raised £500,000 for it to do all the studies to make sure we knew it would work. If we hadn't had City of Culture and if we didn't have that belief in ourselves, if I'd gone round to see business leaders and asked them for a subscription of £5,000 a year prior to something like City of Culture, they would have laughed at me. They wouldn't have given me the money, but actually they did. And, we've moved it on, and it's something that, I hope is still possible in the future.
As do I. Right, we're out of time. So thank you. That's been fascinating. I hope you continue to sit at the helm of the Rix Group for a little while longer.
I'm not sure the kids think that.
They're desperate to be sat in your seat. No, seriously, Tim, thank you. I know you're very busy, so I appreciate you taking time out today, navigating the Hull traffic to get to us and do this.
Well, I hoped I haven't bored everybody, to be quite honest.
I'm sure. Well, you haven't bored me.
Well, there you go. Well, you're being nice to me.
So before you can go, I do have another question, and this has been left by our previous guest.
I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, so he didn't know who he was leaving this question for, and I have it here, which is, have you ever had a sliding doors moment?
I'm not entirely sure what that means.
So, to clarify, it means something that's happened that was at the time seemed inconsequential, but altered the direction or trajectory of your life. Have you seen the movie Sliding Doors?
No.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not being very helpful, am I?
But you understood how I described it.
I think one of the things that has really transformed the Rix organisation through one of those moments is when Rory made me realise that actually it wasn't necessarily, we shouldn't carry on doing what we've always done. What we should do is we should really think about stopping certain things, even though it was something that we'd done forever, and do different things. Yeah. And I think that when I think back to it,
when was it? Was it a few years ago?
No, it was a long. I'm going back, fairly early on in when the two of us started to work closely together, and I think that's made a big difference. So if it was a sliding door moment, I think that's probably one of the most important things.
I should ask Rory this actually. What do you like to work with?
Well, poor old Rory sits in his office, and unfortunately, I can hear everything he says. So if I disagree with what he's saying on the telephone, I'm screaming through the wall at him. So I'm sure he'll think I'm a bloody nuisance, quite frankly. And equally, he can probably hear what I'm saying, but he doesn't shout and
he's
scream
shaking
at
his
me
head,
like I do.
His head in his hands.
It's most notable that James has got the opposite a bit, or he's got the office further on, and I've noticed that he's not moving into Rory's office when Rory decides to leave. So he thinks that I won't be able to hear him.
Like I said, Tim, I can't see you leaving anytime soon. But anyway, thank you again. I've enjoyed our chat.
Yeah, thanks, Anita. I've enjoyed doing it.
Thanks everyone for joining us this time. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Tim. As always, if you'd like to get in touch, please do so via our normal social channels, and I look forward to talking to you again next month. Until then, bye-bye.